inclusive teams and use how you can use Clifton strengths to enable people to be their best, but importantly, give people space to be themselves. These are my hands that keep popping up into the screen. So I'll try and make them more visible. The perfect number of people in a team is one. I don't know if you realise that, but of course, as soon as you start adding other people into the team, the opportunity and potential for conflict and friction is greatly increased. And as the size of the team grows, so the potential for people to annoy each other, no matter how mildly. We're probably all very familiar with the Tuckman model, the form, storm, norm, perform. And I like to add on to the end of that, reform. But I also like to think that when we're grown-up adults, there's ways that we can be aware of where friction and frustration are likely to be created. And if we can understand those from day one, we can have a much more grown-up conversation around how we feel. Now, a lot of my work, as many of you will know, is within the science and engineering base. And inclusion is something that's really dear to my heart. And I didn't realise I'd been feeling excluded in certain ways until particularly there was a young woman who was in my team when I was working in the Department for Trade and Industry. And I was giving her an anecdote of my own. And she just looked at me and waved her very long painted nails and said, but didn't you just tell him to get off and shut up? And I was like, oh. But of course, when I got to the point of realising I was feeling miserable, my self-esteem was so low that I really couldn't speak out and speak up and say, can you just stop doing and saying what you're doing? So understanding what drives and motivates us is so important to helping us be who we are, but also being able to say to other people, can you just pause on that? It's annoying me because of this. So having a strengths language is so powerful in helping us to understand what people bring, but what they need in a team to be their best. So today I want to connect you to the process that we use to build inclusive teams and introduce you to our approach. In particular, this webinar is for you if you want to improve your own leadership skills so that you can consistently impact better on other people and maximize the potential of the people in your team around you. It's for you if you're a bit frustrated by slow progress on organizational inclusion, that you want to understand how to develop and use a different language, have different kinds of conversations with people about how they can be the best. And it's for you if you're still just curious about what you need to consider, whether it's for your students or you're in your early career phase, maybe doing research, or you're just helping other people be better through being a coach. So my aim is to talk for about 30 minutes and enable us to have a little bit of time for some conversation and dialogue around this topic, so you can share the things that you do to help people be more inclusive about what they do. So the usual kind of things are turning off distractions and notifications. I'm sure I've turned mine off, but I do want you to stay till the end. And we'll be sending you, if you choose, a book summary for just the fact that you've turned up and being there for us. It's brilliant to see people here. So why this topic and why now? So I started exploring how we introduce people to their inclusion within the undergraduate, so really early career people that start their undergraduate program. How can we help people participate in activities and learn core professional skills of inclusion and belonging so that every student participating in an undergraduate program can be their best? What can their colleagues and teammates do to make people feel valued, useful, and that they belong within that group? They are there because they're authentic. I was particularly curious about how we can shape those essential skills, but also why aren't they already embedded within the ways that we teach people at the beginning of their professional career? But then I've been fascinated to reflect on my own career and see how things didn't work and how I ended up feeling left out and excluded. One example, I was working in a manufacturing company. I happened to have done my first degree in chemistry before I did a PhD in semiconductor physics. Everybody that I worked with had got physics degrees and worked in the same lab. And they had a slightly different language. When they would ask me a question, I would have to convert it back into chemical theory before I put it into physics theory. Chemistry was my first language. And it made me feel like I was being questioned and undermined pretty much daily. But I didn't realize what was happening and why I was feeling like that. My cognitive processes were slower than they would have been normally because there was an awful lot of backwards and forwards going on inside my head. So what is it that we can do? And what are the things that we can do to make a change? How can we recognize when somebody in our team is feeling a little bit undermined, less confident, and not noticed, a little bit kind of eroded in their particular presence? I like this quote from the lovely Simon Sinek. A team is not a group of people that work together. A team is a group of people that trust each other. When we start thinking more about trust, I'll get to that later, we each trust people in different kinds of ways. So I'm sure some of you are interested in some facts and benefits of inclusion. So this is data that's drawn from two sources. One of them is the Royal Academy of Engineering work on culture in engineering, and the other is from a Catalyst study in 2020, looking at inclusion as a key part of a competitive advantage. So people who feel like they are included and belong, 70% of people believe there is an increase in performance, and 80% see an increase in motivation when they feel like they belong. So that's how individuals feel. But within an organisation, this is the Catalyst study in green, or teams and organisations where there's a higher sense of belonging and engagement are 2 times more likely to hit their financial targets. They're 6 times more innovative, able to be more creative, able to stay ahead of their competitors. But they're 8 times more likely to improve business outcomes when people within the organisation feel like they belong. Pretty stark results, if you ask me, and arguments about why we should be making more effort to being inclusive in the way we go around. But the problems are that there are barriers to progress. Now, some of those, I've seen those myself firsthand over the last 15 years, talking to engineers in particular about tackling inclusion and diversity. And some say, I've literally quote this verbatim, diversity and inclusion is political correctness gone mad, which is kind of makes my heart just sink when I hear that. And it's not that long ago that I heard that presented again. The challenge, though, is that those who have an inclusion privilege, the people in the majority, and it's particularly stark in engineering and technology, people already there, they don't see that people feel excluded. They don't get a sense of how people don't feel they belong and aren't able to contribute. It reaffirms their unconscious biases, their sort of that people are not being able to perform because they're not just good enough. There's a perception of that there is no crisis of inclusion. I do everything I can. I treat everybody the same. But of course, it's not actually that fact. We're not taking the conversation at lunch to be inclusive, taking it to other people, asking them or inviting them to start a conversation. When I worked in the private sector, I remember on a Monday night, on the Sunday night, I would always catch the Formula One highlights so that I knew who'd been on pole, what the big incidents of the day were, and what the likely topics of conversation were going to be in the dining room at the company. I was interested though. I used to catch up with Rugby Special. I loved it, half-hour condensed programme with the highlights of what's been going on in the rugby world. Again, enabled me to stay connected. and talk to my mainly male colleagues. So we need to be able to have those conversations, the sort of small kind of chit chat that goes on in and around the workplace. But something else that's come out of recent research and that I've heard people have actually said to me is that diversity and inclusion is just too difficult and complex. How can we possibly do it? So I got certified last year in the Inclusion Score tool, which helps organisations meet the ISO for diversity and inclusion. And they cite 27 dimensions of difference. Obviously, that's not just that goes beyond the protected characteristics that we have in the UK. There's also, though, as well as our protected characteristics, there's an awful lot of basic behavioural differences between people, not just the sort of neurodiversity that exists amongst people. Some people may have diagnosed one neurodiverse condition, they might have multiple, but there's many people who haven't got a diagnosis, and there's many more of us who have traits that indicate that we sort of have blind spots in certain ways. We can't think or get certain things done in a way. We're more likely to get distracted. We find it difficult to focus. But when we start thinking about that, we can also give ourselves this vocabulary to talk about how we do things different. And the fact is, there's none of us, we're all unique in our own way. And as soon as we start adding different dimensions of difference amongst ourselves, we really start seeing how the complexity of diversity mushrooms. So being able to pause, step back, and take a moment, we can give people space to be who they are and understand what they need and what their motivations are. So, of course, there are many, many factors that she's trying to move some windows that cause falling outs within teams, and using Lego minifigures starts giving that sort of sense of difference between us. How can those fallings out and those frustrations and those things that make people take their ball away from the game, how can they really impact on us? Early in my career, I was criticised for not being a completer finisher, that my attention to detail was perhaps not what some people's might be, that my deadlines might extend and expand compared to other people who would just get on and get it done, and by the end of the day. I know that I've talked in other previous webinars and in workshops, I always talk about manual writing, my nemesis that made me feel like I was going into work every day wearing concrete boots. Not actual writing of manual, but when I was given 6 weeks space by my boss to just focus on it and get it done. The challenge for me, though, was that I needed to talk to people. I needed to connect. I needed to feel the energy of the workplace that I was within. So when I was left alone in an air-conditioned lab for 6 weeks to get on and write the manual, the chilliness of it, not just the physical, but the metaphorical chilliness, really settled into my heart, and my love for the job, and it was huge, gradually shrank until by the end of that period, I decided I needed to go somewhere else. Not thinking about the fact that once it was done, it was done. That didn't figure. It became this overriding burden and drain on my energy and my life, and turned into misery. So one of the tools we use in our workshops is the trust equation. I'm sure many of you think about how we can understand how we build trust between people. So I've just demonstrated beautifully there how I've segued from a story into my next slide. So being a complete finisher is not my thing. I can finish things. I finished and submitted my PhD. My gift to the world is about creativity, about thinking, about bringing different ideas and tools together and helping people solve problems to build a better world. And the trust equation is absolutely at the core of that. It's around helping people to demonstrate their credibility, reliability, helping people to understand who they connect with and why. Can they be intimately close to one people or many? Do they have that sense of building this big community of people around them? Or are they sort of the people that exist on a one-to-one basis, or in a 1-on-3 or a 1-on-4? And if you put them in a situation where they've suddenly got to build a really deep relationship with a lot of people at once, they find it overwhelming, and they kind of like can shrink inside. So knowing how we build trust with people is really important. So I'm just curious about those of you here. Do you trust everybody in the same way? You just add that into the chat. Do you trust everybody based on them doing a good job? Or people on doing what they say they will do? Do you trust people because they always show up on time? Any thoughts from anybody? Do you trust everybody the same way? Tab says no, and you still get caught out. I'm really curious about how people's trust varies with other people. Let's talk about that at the end. And how do you still get caught out? Melody, your default is to trust until proven otherwise. Yeah, I'm a bit of I will just trust anybody and everybody. Just because you're there, you're amazing. I'll trust you. I will go with you. Unless you've got sweets, I've got to say, I am not a sweet eater. So don't come at me with your Haribos, because I'm not interested in that. But otherwise, yeah, Beryl, no. As you say, it's built in over time. Yeah. So we're seeing this complete polarity here, aren't we, of people who are incredibly trusting, incredibly easy to go, yeah, that's great, I'll come with you, I'll do what you ask, and other people who are saying no. Interesting. And the trust equation is a really great insight into trust and how it works. And so when we understand, and we've got that kind of cognitive evidence base of people, the credibility that you've done something, you've worked hard on it, I've worked with you, and you've shown up, and you stepped in when I needed help, and you've shown up, that reliability, and we've developed over time that intimacy. Gary, I trust people I work with in their teams as a freelancer, and I make sure that you're trustworthy. Absolutely, it takes time to develop, and that's where, when we work for ourselves, we build testimonials that we try to show up for people and create a visibility that we're there consistently. Really, really important. And there's other people who are more kind of not cognitive, they're more kind of effective about the way they build trust, which is based on emotions. Sarah's trusting her gut and finding the right people to do it. And Fiona, it deepens over time. And you aim to trust until proven wrong. So sometimes not trusting until proven interest. Love it. I love the diversity of ways that you're talking around how you build trust with people. And having conversations about trust is something I think we tend not to do. It's some of those things that gets pushed away into a corner. And as soon as we detect, I don't know about you, whether you've got a self-interest radar on about whether you trust people, but when somebody starts showing up and your detector goes off that you're only trusting them, they're only showing up because they want to get out of something what they can, it starts torpedoing the trust. And it's in the trust equation here on the bottom line. It absolutely smashes if you're not careful. So when we see people and we believe that they're only doing what they're doing because they want to raise their profile, they're only involved in doing charity work to show themselves and stand out and speak out, it starts undermining the value that we see in them. So what we want to do, and what we try really hard with the workshops that we do, is help and start to take the inclusion and diversity conversation beyond just looking at issues around visible difference or invisible difference. We try to have conversations with people around inclusion, what it really means. We like to use specific tools and introduce people to frameworks, not just Clifton Strengths, but tools like the Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. What is it that can really torpedo the levels of a team? If we can break things down, I'm sure this analytical approach in me is this scientific method and training that I've got deeply embedded within me. And I don't even think that was there from studying science. I think that kind of approach is something that I've grown over my life. But what we really want to do in terms of inclusive leadership is help leaders understand how they can create inclusive team cultures, but how and why we can end up judging people based on our history. Some of us are more inclined to judge people or put people into these little boxes based on behaviours that we've seen in people before. But creating a language and communication amongst people, building psychological safety and helping people to be inclusive in decision making is something that's really important in creating that inclusive and hopefully ultimately diverse team, and understanding that diversity is not just one dimension. And diversity is not about having, I don't know if any of you my age might remember Kenny Everett, but I think so often we do diversity to people. And if you can just get that image of Kenny Everett on one of his shows with his inflatable hammer, hitting people over the head with it, we will be inclusive, you will be diverse. We are only ever inclusive because we've decided that we're going to shift the way that we behave and interact with other people. We're going to give people space to be themselves. So, love Lencioni. I love here the sort of that foundational aspect of trust. What happens when trust is eroded and we don't use it? We have people, particularly with some Clifton strengths more than others, who are really step away from conflict. People who aren't confident in understanding difference, are worried about upsetting people. I love introducing them to books like Humble Inquiry. I love helping people understand how, if they have got a very analytical mindset and prone to asking question after question after question, helping those people to appreciate that, you know, sometimes they can ask a different question and it might land differently. Cynic says start with why, I say start with what. And then if you use Michael Bungay-Stanier, then ask, and what else? So soften the way you questions. Ask, tell me, I'm curious. How did that come about? Turning questioning into learning opportunities, not making it into a situation where it's an execution skill. Why has that happened? It immediately implies whose fault's that? Who's gone wrong? Who's dropped the ball? Lack of commitment. This is so about perceptions, about people's commitment to participate. Doing a piece of research a few years ago, and a senior guy in one of the UK funding councils said to me, but people are part-time, they're busy doing other things. They don't have their mind on their work. Their commitment of part-time workers is far less than the people who are full-time. Imagine my joy when I was having a conversation with the president of the Royal Society, the UK's National Academy of Science, and he said, oh, I see that there's not an issue because we all work on things. There's no single issue research now. And the director of the Hadley Centre for Climate Change said, I've got 3 part-time women scientists working on this particular project. It's amazing. Because they had their babies at similar times, he said one of them will be in the office, 2 of them were out at a toddler group, going for a walk, talking about the problem. When they come back into work and have that overlap meeting, the thinking has diversified massively. And when Bob May said, when I reported that back to Bob May, president of the Royal Society, his brain just went, oh, and it landed amazingly with him. And it changed the conversation I was able to have with him as my role as manager of the creator of the diversity programme at the Royal Society. Ultimately as well, you know, Lencioni goes up into avoidance of accountability and the impact of that. So tools that we love to use are things like radical candor, helping people to understand the difference between dialogue, discussion, and debate. Tools that I've loved to take on board over the years and deploy with teams. And those of you who are here, Hayley will be sending you a PDF summary. So just put in the chat, would you like the graphic summary of text for the Lencioni book? Would you like to have a text summary of the book? So just put graphic or text in the chat and we will send that through to you soon after the webinar has finished, just as an appreciation of your participation. So Google have done a number of really, really useful pieces of research around work, and in particular on team effectiveness. And there are 5 important contributors to effectiveness in a team is psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity, meaning. We don't like doing work if it doesn't have a particular meaning to us, and impact. But the most important of all of those in their research was psychological safety. How do we create psychological safety within our working space? So let's take a different lens on it. And what are the things that we can ask people to do? So frame a job or a piece of work that we're working on where people are looking or feeling a little bit like they're not in the right space. And frame it as an issue that we can learn from, not just in terms of an individual who might appear to be struggling, not contributing in a meeting, might because their Clifton strengths are a more of a slower thinking, deep thinking nature, like intellection, talking more about that in a moment, but sort of get it as a learning problem, not an execution failure problem. Allow people to use failure. Oh, how I wish when I was doing my PhD, people had published failed recipes for etching semiconductors. It would have saved me hours and hours of laborious work. But we tend not to publish on our failures. We publish the successful aspects of it. Acknowledge your own fallibility as an individual and use humble inquiry. Be humble. That's interesting. I'm curious. I wondered about that too. It really helps people feel it's okay to not be sure and know that you're acknowledging that they were brave in speaking up and speaking out. I know my son, if he watches this, will be cringing, but I know that he used to ask lots of questions at school in sixth form because he knew other people didn't understand issues in physics. So be curious and ask lots of questions is also a way of helping other people feel comfortable. Nice to have a little bit of animation there. So why do we use strengths to help people feel that they belong and to create an inclusive workspace? The clues to talent are what is behind the Clifton Strengths tools, which is 2 million interviews over 40 years by Don Clifton and his team. It gives us, when we're working in our strengths area, we have a yearning to do that again. We enjoy it. It brings a smile to our face. We get into flow. We lose track of time. We kind of just enjoy it. Yeah, I do wonder sometimes about the things that when I get into flow and how useful it is. One of the places I get in the zone is cycling my bike hands-free all the way along the promenade in Bournemouth. Somebody was in a meeting with me the other day and said, how did you manage to cycle 6 miles along the prom? It's always busy. Well, it was early morning and it was in March. But I get in that flow. I'm focusing, I'm balanced. But of course, I lead with thinking themes. It gives my brain a rest because it's kind of able to just focus on doing something. And I've finished doing it and I just feel refreshed and energized. And I love it. And I love the fact there's an element of danger to it. My kids, my husband, my friends, my colleague, Helen, will say, you shouldn't be doing that. Don't do it. Don't do it. I can do it. I love it. I've always done it. When we're working with our strengths, we need glimpses of excellence, rapid learning, and that deep satisfaction that brings that brilliant smile to our faces. And those of you who like the numbers about why we use strengths, this is data straight from Gallup, and it's absolutely the data and facts based on evidence. So there's lots of data behind why we should be working and building strengths work-based and engaged workplaces. Being able to understand what drives us is really important. Every single one of our Clifton strengths, those talents that came out of the Gallup research, gives us an appreciation and knowledge around the environments that we like to be in and the activities that we choose to do. So for me, it's not the place to sit and work in a quiet space on my own, writing a document that requires meticulous cross-referencing backwards and forwards. Sure, I can do it. Sure, I finished my PhD. I did all that referencing. But that was to get a qualification. That was to allow me to step forward in my career. So those talents that give us a drive. For me, it enables, my drive is to always be doing something new, not being idle. And it doesn't matter whether I'm doing something, what I'm doing sometimes, it's just doing something. It changes and defines the behavior and the ways that we engage with others. But it also helps us to filter out different aspects of our world. When asked by somebody, well, actually, it's another son story. When I showed him his Clifton strengths, he said it's easy, and I showed him my profile and his dad's profile. And well, of course, your dad counts the blades of grass, and you just say the grass is green. We have a very different level of how we see the world. We would draw very different pictures. One of the things I've started doing in the last few years is learning the piano. Not because I love the act of learning. I'm fascinated with the cognitive process around how our brains take things from short-term memory and put it into long-term memory. I'm fascinated with how somebody who believes that they're not musical at all can suddenly enjoy moments in the music when different notes go together. I see patterns in the music in front of me, and I can sight read brilliantly, according to my piano teacher last week. But I love the analogy with the piano keyboard and the Clifton strengths. There's 34 of them, and there are 88 keys on the keyboard. But just imagine the complexity we get from the keyboard and the music we can make by knowing the dominant notes within our own psyche. Enables us to understand who and how we are. So I just want to give you a team grid of a team I worked with over the last year. And it's an amazing team. There was quite a lot of commonality within the strengths they had. In particular, and I'll explain for those of you not familiar with Clifton's strengths, I was fascinated. I've done team workshops with something like, I don't know, 4,000 people over the last 10, 15 years. Not all full 34, admittedly, but a lot of it is with top 5. I had never seen teams with so much belief within it. Belief is about having this sort of gut feeling, a gut response to things. People have very strong values, and that can be an absolute stopper. And if you're on a team with somebody, just one person who's got belief really high, this person can come along incredibly powerful. It's an executing theme, but it can have a huge impact on other people in terms of the drive that it gives them to do things in a certain way. When you put that together with other people with belief who've got a drive to do things in a slightly different way or with a slightly different value set, it can start pushing against each other. Luckily in this team, for most of them, they'd worked together on projects before, and they were working really well together, and they got along really, really well. We had 4 people with learner, but most of these people, so 2 of these people worked in a different country, and the other people made a combination of hot desking or always going into the office. One individual, when I was doing one-to-one debriefs with them, felt really left out, isolated. She didn't feel she could speak up in in meetings. And there are quite a few influencing themes. So influencing themes are very energetic, energizing themes. And so the people have known each other in different configurations over the year, but they had this drive to get things done. They typically had relator, they built strong one-to-one relationships. And then I noticed that she had intellection. Intellection is a joy of thinking. And indeed, her hobbies were about going for long walks, getting up early, taking the dog out for up to 2 hours in the morning before she started working. But when she was in a team meeting, she found that the conversation was so fast and furious that by the time she'd done her deep reflection of it, she was not able to, the conversation or the topic had moved on. And so she felt that she didn't quite belong. And the tool gave her the vocabulary to talk about how she wasn't able to feel part of it. So I've printed these are the strengths that I pulled out as an example of. I love the way strengths helps us to understand the motivators and the demotivators of us as individuals. I've talked a little bit about my desire to move and get things done, and how the way I'm wired is I don't know where I'm going. I love the journey. But when I can work with somebody who's got focus, who's people who start with the end in mind, it can give us an energy and a direction and a power to get things done. But it can also cause friction around understanding that sometimes we need to shift direction. So the idea that people won't tackle, that's where I've missed my line there. So it's about helping, for me, it's helping the person with focus to ensure that they stay on track and don't become fixated with one direction of travel. But for me, it's understanding that the energy that this person can give to my outcomes and make a difference. So one of the tools I love, which is from the deep thinking of a guy called Simon Hurry, a South African strengths guru, I like to think of him, just because he's got this deep thinking around strengths and how it gives us a unique insight into people and the strengths combinations that they have. You might not be able to read the particular titles, but I love the way he's framed the 4 quadrants of domains. So the people framed the sort of blue themes, which are about connecting with people, the influencing, which is about energy creation and persuasion, people who deal in knowledge and information and that are green, and the purple ones who let's get this done, but in very different ways. And the people who've got theme combinations at the top are about we can do this together. So people who've got thinking and executing themes are focused on outcomes. People who've got orange and purple dominating, let's get going, let's make it happen. People who have got blue and green, very much more about contemplation. So this gives us a really unique insight into the way that people are wired. So let's help teams take action and tackle the way that they can feel left out and excluded, that they feel a vital cog in the team. So number 1, establish a common vocabulary. 2, create space to discuss team dynamics and helping people feel that the fact that they feel or different to other people in the team is important. And actually that they need to feel included and specifically included. And get your leaders to commit to creating this model of continuous improvement about growing and building this psychologically safe space, aligning around the common purpose, but knowing how each of our strengths actually helps us connect to the organization, the business, personal and team goals, creates the all-important alignment. Because if we don't feel aligned and that we're going to connect and get something out of contributing, our motivations will wither and die. So it's around building this positive strengths-based culture is so important. So strengths-based focus to an inclusive team is looking at task versus relationship and making sure that we understand who is focused in which area. Helping others to know and orient around the strength space is really important, about giving space to others, and gives us a radar for appreciating the differences and contributions of people. And I know that people who've got neurodiverse diagnoses, people who've got work-based coaches, whether they've got ADHD, Asperger's or autism, have told me that having their strengths profile really helps them understand themselves, but most importantly, gives them clues and ideas about how to connect and engage with other people. I love Maureen's quote, shaped by culture, driven by strengths. That's a topic for another day. So strengths gives you a lens on the world and into how you think, feel and get things done. But it also gives other people, every single person around you, at home, in your friendship groups and at work, a different lens and perspective on the world as well. And we need to give space to that. We need to be able to embrace diversity and foster inclusion so that we can build stronger teams. Because if we don't, we simply won't be able to. We've got some slots left on our workshops for the rest of this year. I believe when last looked, there are about 4 slots left. And so those of you who want to register or reserve one of those slots, please just type yes in the chat, and Hayley will get back to you. But we're giving, because of it's coming up to the celebrations of the 4th of July, we've got a special offer with a 20% off and a personal one-to-one debrief for teams of up to 10 people. We really believe that we need to be moving forwards and creating the sort of way that we really specifically work to build inclusion within a team. We need to stop just sending people to mandatory training programs, bashing people over the head about how flawed they are, that their biases are shaping and stopping them from being good people. Fundamentally, I believe that, well, apart from that, I do trust everybody. Everybody is a useful, worthy, great human being until proven different. We need to help people sometimes know that the small comments, the little nudges and digs are really, really the things that can push people away. And how can we change that? By having an open conversation, helping people understand what they love and frustrate about people, helping people to appreciate and shift into a positive psychology approach, so that we're not about focusing on the things that are wrong, looking at those learning opportunities, helping each of us understand what's the best of them. It's another activity that we do in our workshops. But we also want people to help when their strengths let them down, when we're slipping from the Jedi side and there's a bit of Darth Vader's kind of creeping in. By being able to adjust the volume of our strengths and our talents is a way that we can flex and adapt to be inclusive of other people and bring people into our own sphere. Knowing that if we are very high trust people, in Clifton Strengths terms, you've probably got the relator strength high in your profile, that sometimes people can feel left out because they're not part of your inner trusted group and community. And if you know that you have relator high and that is your tendency, then there are ways, there are strategies of bringing people in. Create lunches, create workshops, make sure you have space to go and have a chat or a coffee, or go out after work with people. Specifically invite people in, and invite those people in first before the trusted group. I love this quote. I know you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realise that what you heard is not what I meant. Being a communicator is about having a two-way flow of information. And I love using and helping people use different tools to listen more deeply, but also to know when they're in a different space around the sort of discussion, dialogue and debate, because I believe that debate is rarely useful when we're trying to build an inclusive and diverse community. And if we recognise that we're in a debate space, we need to clearly label it that we are looking at having an interesting and potentially challenging conversation. But we need to do it with skill, and we need to do it with sensitivity towards other people and not put people into a negative position. So life is a matter of perspective, and often we may speak the same language as some, but we may be transmitting and receiving on different wavelengths. So I'd like us all to go forward and align our frequencies to listen better to others. Thank you so much for listening and joining, and I hope that you've taken something away today. So any questions in the chat, Hayley, let me know, and be delighted to hear how you work on inclusive teams or use Clifton Strengths, whichever it is that you do. So I'm going to stop sharing and open up for questions. Thank you.